It's June 27, 2006, and we are going to interview Bob Capener.
The one that actually converts hex to decimal, so on. Decimal to hex and so on.
Do you?
Somewhere.
TI something?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I found a bunch of those in surplus, so I picked them up. I found that tape writer too. I figured nobody would want that thing, so. And here's an early way of organizing data. You put it in a Rolodex.
Oh, for heaven's sakes, yeah, I haven't seen that.
And so what about the, you knew about the next machines, right?
Yeah, I'm the one that got the next machines.
And the math department had them as well?
Later on, the math department, when the next machine first came out, I wrote a grant and got a next machine for our department. And they cost around $12,000. And it was one of the, I don't think the computer people have actually come up with the quality for a user interface that the next machine had, or still has, if you can get it to run. And it was a great machine, but it just cost too much money. When it came with a Sybase database that supported 5 users, and you could get FrameMaker on it, which was a desktop publishing software, and that worked great. And it was had Objective-C, so it had an object-oriented C programming language, and it had some features. It had a read-write disk, like a read-write CD on it, and the problem was the drive for that was like $4,000 if something went wrong with it. It had some features that other machines I don't think have really touched. It had a Unix operating system, the Berkeley operating system. The original ones were based on Mach, and then on top of that, they built an interface called Next Step, capital N, small e, capital XT, and this thing was years ahead of anything else. That's too bad it didn't succeed. It's quite a machine. So after that, people, why the math department liked it, is it had a math package that was able to do differential equations, derivatives, and things like that. What the heck was the name of that thing? Wolfram made it. I keep wanting to say Math Lab, but then prior to that, years ago in the 70s, when the school obtained a DEC 10 machine, which was kind of the standard machine for research in universities, and it raised our prestige, Weber State's prestige, in the eyes of the University of Utah. They actually would talk to us. They'd go to meetings and they'd say, how did you make this kind of decision? I said, well, the story goes, the DEC guy got our vice president soused and sold it to him, which was the best thing. Of course, that time I was in physics, and when the vice president went around to all the departments, that's what I advised him to do. Get the DEC 10, because that puts us in with all the research centers, like the Artificial Intelligence Lab at Stanford and everything else. There's some interesting stories that go along with that one. I took a student to the DECUS user group meeting down in Las Vegas. We went around to the various sections, and what we wanted was a graphics package to do computer graphics. And the fellow says, I've got the perfect package for you. It's called SAIL, which stands for the Stanford Artificial Intelligence Lab. And along with that is another package that does graphics called MLab, Math Lab, and it did all sorts of differential stuff and calculus and things like that. And I had this student who was an honor student, and I picked up to work on an NSF grant that I got. And he's taking a math class, so the professor gave him this complicated equation to take the derivative of, and it took about 6 pages of work. You know how mathematicians are. They like to do lots and lots of little grid work. And so he said, well, I'm curious, will this program we have do this? And it zipped it right out. So he turned it in, and he's the only one in the class that got it right. And he felt guilty about it, so he went up to the professor and says, I got to tell you, I didn't really do this. A computer did this. And the professor says, computers can't do this. So he came back to me and he says, what do I do, Bob? And I said, well, take the advice of the professor. If he doesn't believe in computers, let it go. You know, we know computers can do it. And you were honest and you did what you could. In 15 years, they'll catch up. Sorry. So, lots of interesting things. So the next machine really was a great machine, and it did some good things.
So you found this machine. This was the original one. Was the Cube, I guess, right?
Yeah, like this one right here. It was just like that one. They had one that was more expensive because it had a high-powered graphics board in it, and Jobs acquired Pixar to do their graphics for them, and it came out with translucent graphics so that you could see one of their advertisements, which they had a car in the redwood forest. Behind, you'd look through the window of the car, and on the other side of the car, you'd see, I think it was Donald Duck or Mickey Mouse or somebody standing there. So you could actually look through things like windows in the graphics, which was phenomenal at that time. But we didn't happen to have the money to get that one, but we did this next. It really was. It was the best machine for anybody to use.
How many of those did we end up having?
We only had one. And later I got the desktop one that I gave to you. And but the University of Utah had Grundles of them. And all over the world they picked these things up.
I think the math department still has one running, or at least they did last year. I don't know if they.
Yeah, they made great use of it. The DEC 10 did similar things, but in order to use the DEC 10, you had to have an expensive graphics terminal, and then you had to have people that knew how to run the interface, set up the interfaces. We didn't have the networking at that time either to really run it off a mainframe machine.
So where was the DEC 10 sitting when we got that?
DEC 10 was upstairs, and I'm not kidding you when I say the fact that the school acquired the DEC 10 raised our prestige around the country. And this student I was telling you about with the math problem, he was poor like most students, and when it come time for him to graduate and go out and look for a job, he didn't have a car to go anywhere, so we'd make applications and I'd take him out to the various places. He'd get in the last two, but he'd never get selected. So I finally went, I think it was with HP there in Salt Lake, and asked him, why didn't you select this guy? I mean, he's one of the best students I've ever had. And they said, well, he doesn't have any experience, and we don't count classwork as experience. Well, I drug him in on my three-year National Science Foundation project. And during that period of time, they had gotten a DEC 10, but what they were interested in doing is putting COBOL and making all this management transitions. So we started to implement stuff for other people on campus and our own projects. The microprocessors had come in at that time and were real popular, and we'd gotten hold of all of the simulators for the various microprocessors that we could run on the DEC 10. So we were simulating all these processors, and we were using it in our classwork and that. And we interfaced the Motorola 68000 to a little microcomputer. At that time, it was probably the first one to do that. And in fact, the work we had done, later I became a referee for the National Science Foundation for 2 years in a row back in Washington, D.C., and it turned out we refereed the East Coast, and we were at least 3 years ahead of everybody back there, all of the big schools back there. And then one of the salesmen for multi-channel pulse height analyzers, I was in the physics department at that time, came around to try to sell us a pulse height analyzer, and he said, "Good heavens, you guys are ahead of Caltech and Stanford and everybody else," because this stuff was all new and people were just starting to figure it out. Most people thought that the microprocessor really was usable in measuring devices and control devices and things like that. They hadn't really got on to the power of what this thing was. And so our little research group, we did a lot of things like that.
So where were the emulators coming from for the
we got them from the companies and from, like our MLab stuff came from the National Institute of Health. That's where this guy was. And we got these things from various places. We'd write all over the country and say, like to Motorola and say, we're doing this and we need some support. And we don't have any money, so people would give us these things. And we'd put them on. And we had a fellow that worked up in the computer department, and he was kind of our spy or something, and he'd put them on the machine when other people said, "No, we can't do that." There's some really interesting stories about that.
Yeah, who do you remember who that was?
That was Paul Patane was his name.
I think I've heard that name before.
He later went to work for Flying J, I think, and I don't know where he is now. But he helped us get all these programs up and running on the DEC 10 because he had access to it.
This is prior to Danny Johnston coming in, right?
Yeah, This was a long time, maybe 10 years or 8 years before Danny came along. And then when I worked on this NSF grant, Crittenden called me up because I was always fighting in curriculum committee. They said, "Oh, you can't do computer stuff in physics. That's our domain." So one day Crittenden called me up and says, "Instead of fighting us, why don't you join us?" And I said they wanted someone to help build the scientific part of their data processing department. And I said, "Okay, what the heck?" So I moved all my equipment and that down to the data processing department.
You'd been doing a lot of it already up in physics at this point? Oh
yeah, I did. First Pascal, a lot of this. And I had a blind student, totally blind, that could type on the computer faster than I could. He had a little gadget that he'd run across the screen. He'd put his finger in it and he'd run it across the screen, and he could sit there and type. And we still use him as an example of if you people who can see can't do this any better than that, we've got a blind person that can do it better than that. So he was phenomenal. So we that NSF grant did more to attract really good students. In fact, one of the students that I had during that project was Steve Sir, and he, when he's ready to graduate, he applied to all the major universities. And in order to, I think at that time, Stanford University was taking in five students in their graduate program. To get in there, you had to have 99 percentile on all of the sections of the graduate record exam, and he did. And he went to Stanford. He was one bright student. One day I asked him, "Well, why did you major in physics instead of computer science?" And he said, because you had this project, and I was interested, and you gave us the freedom to do things. I just, we worked as a group. In fact, one Christmas, we bought a Heathkit computer that came in a great big cardboard box, and all the parts were wrapped up in little brown paper bags with plastics on them. And it was actually a DEC LSI computer. It was a little Dexter, little mini computer system that they had. And we took all Christmas vacation. I think it took us 1,100 man hours to put that thing together. We had to solder the backplane and everything. So the students and I spent our whole Christmas vacation. We put that thing together, and it worked the first time we turned it on, which was phenomenal. You could do that. So that was a good experience.
LSI. So that did that have a keyboard, or was it just the switches? Or
it had switches and a paper tape reader.
It had a paper tape reader. Well,
yeah, and we had to build our own little keyboard system. It did have a keyboard. Yeah, it did have a keyboard, but it also had switches on it. And that was an interesting experience because you built everything from the ground up. You had the circuit boards, the printed circuit boards, but you had to put all the components on, and you had to build the power supplies and everything. The only thing, the error that was made was one of the students tightened down a choke, for the power supply and cracked it. It had a magnetic thing. And I said, we'll just tighten it up here and it'll work. It'll be okay. And it worked just fine. So that was a good experience.
What was the output for that?
I think we had a basic language. I think it had the basic language in it.
Did it have a screen?
Oh, it had the operating system was RT11. It was like the PDP-11 systems had, and then it had the basic language on it. Then following that, we came down here. I connected up with Wayne Andrews in electronics, and I took this fellow I'm talking about, and Wayne Andrews had another student that was really sharp. In fact, he later became quite high up in Ford Motors electronics division. And we came down here in this building and built an operating system. And Wayne had all sorts of connections with Hill Field, so everything you do with paper tape at that time. And so we got this Mylar tape that had the operating system on it, and that was all nice. And then we got a film editor device with the wheels on it, and we got built photoelectric devices, and we'd crank that thing up. We'd really load that operating system up fast. Probably broke the records for loading an operating system of that nature. And actually, had we, when we got our degrees, instead of taking general ed, if they'd taught us how to be a venture capitalist, we'd have probably been Bill Gates. Because we were doing this ahead of Bill Gates. But we were just interested in doing things, not money, unfortunately. Now, so there's lots of interesting things we've done. When we became a department here, in somewhere around 84, 85, somewhere there, the school gave us, I think it was $160,000 to buy 2 computers. And what I did was I bought the microfaxes, and they were little gadgets about the size of a filing cabinet, a 2-drawer filing cabinet. And one of them we put the DEX VMS operating system on, and the other one we put Unix on. So we had both Unix and VMS. And then the students are always hanging around seeing all these things, so I said to one student, you're in charge of this one, you're in charge of this one, the other one. And that's when, a little later on, Danny came on, when the students left. And I started, we were doing, we had a class, 2 operating system classes. One for the software engineers, which was a show and tell. And the other one was internals. In fact, we may have had we may have had those two operating systems classes and an internals class, but the internals class was on the VMS system, the XVMS system, and Unix was really coming on popular, especially at Unisys, because they had a real large division for networking, and they started up their Unix program, and so I took half the students that wanted to, and said, we'll just teach this class on the side. And instead of coming to the VMS class, I'll set this other one up. It's not official, but so you'll be working under VMS officially. But over here, we're going to study the Unix internals. And I had, I think, about 20 students in that class. And all of them, but 2 of them, were employed as students before they graduated, because they were the ones that really knew Unix and Unisys, and employed them. And in fact, even my son and the fellow who first ran the Unix system got on at Unisys. So what I learned from this whole thing is that what is really important for the student is that they work on things other than classwork. That they work on research projects, they work on things that are hands-on, so they gain real-life experience. So when they go to interview, they can say that. Now, let me come back to Tim Manus, the fellow I was talking about with the math solution. He once I found out that the classwork didn't count, we wrote up everything we'd done on this National Science Foundation. Next interview we had was with the University of Utah's medical genetics program. And he just, when he went in there and they started talking to him about these things, the MD heart surgeon that was in charge of this, who was later killed in that Nova Scotia plane crash, he was from Ogden originally, and he said, well, you were using MLab to do all this? And he says, well, where did that come from? He says, the National Institute of Health. He says, I just came back from the sabbatical from there. He says, I didn't know Weber State had that kind of quality. So see, it really pays to make sure you get the right kind of equipment, even for the campus. That people aren't looking down their nose at it and saying, oh, you bought a Xerox computer and it went out of business the next year. That's what they wanted to buy. Fortunately, they got the DEC 10. So and I later took that student to the Stanford Artificial Intelligence Lab, and we toured that so that he kind of got a better feeling for where everything came from. But he was hired, and the school wasn't graduating because he lacked 2 hours in phys ed. But he didn't have time to get a degree because the next year he was in Paris, France, delivering a paper to a big international convention. And I have to laugh because they did the same thing to my son. He lacked 1 hour in history or something. They wasn't graduating. But later they said, we need money. So they kept sending these letters, donate. And he wrote back and says, I'm not donating nothing to you. I'm going to be filthy rich. I'm a doctor. I'm going to be filthy rich. I'm not going to give you guys 1 cent. So guess what? They arranged to graduate him. So money's more important than history, I guess.
I'd like to see NAMSI. I did see when I went to the museum, Computer History Museum in California. You should go there sometime and check it out.
We'll have to. My wife wants to go to California. Where's
it's in Silicon Valley.
Oh, is it?
And it's quite large. I mean, they've got everything in there. Like you were talking about the Pixar, when Jobs bought Pixar. And there's a Pixar machine where they combined the Next and the.
Oh.
It's really.
I'd like to go see that.
It's the cube, but it's got this. It looks funky.
Where about in Silicon Valley?
It's right off the highway. You just go south of San Francisco. Half an hour.
Okay.
Whatever it is, and
when I go there,
I'll give you
When I go there, I usually go up and see the 2 mile long linear accelerator. I always like stopping.
I've never seen the linear accelerator.
Last time I was there, which is a number.
Is that SRI that has that?
Yeah, you had to call up and make an appointment to go through with the group. They put you in a big auditorium and give you a film and a lecture. Then they put you on a bus and go see the facilities. And most people probably doesn't mean much, but the hugeness of the detectors and things is quite amazing. Your wife may not like it, but those of us who like to tinker with things, that's, oh my gosh, look at this, and you're doing this just to see a little flash of light. And how fast does it have to be? A micro nanosecond or something, That's
let me get you. You got some light there. So let me ask you this: since you were talking about it, it seemed as if when you were talking about, you helped them get the Deck 10, but then you had to sneak onto the Deck 10 almost.
Yeah, when we the people who worked upstairs had. Early when I got here, about 66 maybe or 67, I wrote a proposal to get a Deck PDP-15. It was a bigger machine than the 11s, and so the management said, "No, you go, don't get. You don't have the right to get a computer for the physics department." But at that time, physics was funded. Well, probably could have gotten it. So they said, we'll buy the computer, and the campus can use it. And so they bought an IBM 360, which was a card machine. So all the people upstairs were card people. And the Deck 10 was an interactive computer like you have today. And so they had to hook it all up to the campus. They had to wire the campus. And what they used was... instead of RS-232, you used current loops. So they had to run wires all over the campus for that. People upstairs didn't know how to use an interactive computer. Well, I'd been on a visiting scientist leave, and I had been using an interactive computer. So I knew all about these and how to use them. And we hooked up our terminals up in the physics building, and you could only get 4,800 baud. But my NSF grant, I got a Tektronix graphics machine, which Tektronix was really classy stuff, it was well built. And I could do 9,600 baud off that thing. So we were up making some measurements in that. We got into the Deck 10 as what in those days you called it God, because you ruled everything. And so I called up the people up there and said, "Hey, you guys, I'm logged in as a super user. I'm logged in as the head administrator for your system. In other words, I'm God." And I heard these guys say, the guy on the phone, he turns to the other guys in there, I could hear him, and he says, "Hey, Capener thinks he's God." And everybody's, And then I hear this, clomp, 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 so they were walking over to the monitor, and then I hear this, he is! And so we actually looked around while we were there. And we found this note that the Deck installer had left. He says, "I've never been in an installation so bad in my whole life as this thing. The roof leaks. People don't know what they're doing, And I thought, oh boy, we better race this thing." We didn't do it, but and so they didn't. It was a whole different way of doing things, working from a terminal, and they didn't know anything about protecting files. The whole system was open, you know. So I had to explain to him how you have to set protections and do all these things. So from there on, anything that went wrong, it was my fault and my students' fault. You know, we were the target of everything. So on numerous occasions we'd get phone calls about, hey, you guys, like when they later went to the systems they had and got the networking set up, it was, you guys have got a switch or a bridge or something down here. You're flooding the whole campus. And we'd say, well, what's the MAC address of it? And I say, well, that's not one of ours. We only have deck equipment and certain type of equipment. That's one of yours, and so we don't, you know. And we did the first networking for here. You know, we did everything. And so we had a good deal of knowledge.
That was off the deck 10.
That was the deck 10.
And it was wired up to the physics.
Was wired. They wired it to various places on the campus, like the science building, and they wired it down to the business building. And at that time, we were in data processing, and data processing was in Building 1. And then, I think it was Building 2, they had this terminal server device that came down from the Deck 10, and then out of that device it went to the various terminals in the lab there. Well, we couldn't ever get any speed out of it or anything. So the nice thing about DEC is that they published all their electrical diagrams. So I went, and I got to know the guys that installed the system real well. So I went out and looked at their diagrams, and I said, here's the problem. And I was constantly fixing that thing down there. Here's the problem. Right here. You got this huge capacitor here. Now, there's no reason to have this huge capacitor. This was because you had teletypes, and you get these darn spikes off the teletype machines. Well, we don't have teletypes anymore. We got terminals. And so all we got to do is cut this capacitor out here. And the DEC service guy says, well, I can't do that without a field authorization. And he took out his dikes, and he put them down on the table. He says, no, I can't do that. And he turned away, and I picked them up and went click, click. and everything worked fine after that. No problem. And then one day, I'm sitting in my office, and the guy says, this was earlier in the time, he says, Capener, what the hell? This was on a Saturday. What is going on with this campus? Every hour, there's some huge pulse that comes in and interferes with our computer. And I thought for a minute, I said, oh yeah, I know what that is. They set the clocks every hour here, and they send out a 50-volt pulse on the power lines across the campus. That's what's screwing you up. So there was a lot of interesting things like that went on. You know, when they got rid of the Deck 10, they got a Deck 20, and that we were upstairs at that time. We had that lab up there, and then they got rid of the Deck 20. They wanted a machine for the faculty and a machine for the administration, so they have two separate machines. Well, I was the chairman of the computer committee at that time, and Kim Wheatley was the assistant vice president. And the Harris company came in, and they wanted to give us a machine, and it was a fast machine, but the machine was a real-time operating system. It had a real-time operating system, and that's not what you want for students or faculty. What you need is a machine that is user-friendly, and real-time machines are not user-friendly because they have to run fast and they take everything off that makes it user-friendly. Well, through the politics, they ended up getting that Harris machine. And I spent a month and a half of my own time during the summer helping the guy install the dang thing, and then I had to take a leave of my
professorship here to keep the thing alive. And I worked on that thing for about 20 hours a day, keeping it alive and running, because I had some major problems. And it was a really weird machine. Our students had discovered that if you say assign 6 equal 3, in other words, you assign as your terminal the printer, the machine crashed. And I'd get these calls from the people upstairs saying, please tell your students not to do that anymore. And I said, if I tell my students not to assign 6 equal 3, you won't have just 20 of them doing it. You'll have 300 or 400 of them doing it. And it was really strange. I have so many great stories about that thing. It was unbelievable. The terminal, they had a special terminal. It was made out here at the International Center out west of the airport, and it had a good GUI editor, but you had to have this special terminal. It had a chip in it that was made. It was like a Beehive terminal with a special Harris chip in it. Well, the guys gave me one. Well, the people that installed it and all that. I had the electronics department had gotten a contract with the Saudis, with the Iranians, to teach them for 4 or 5 years about computers, and they had gotten Harris machine equipment to do that on. So I had been over there for the part of the summer learning all about that equipment just out of curiosity. And so when they brought in the bigger Harris machine over here, out of curiosity, I went over and looked at that, and that's how I got involved with the whole darn thing. And so I ended up basically being the babysitter for that until they got mad at me and shoved me in a corner. Well, here's one story you got to really laugh at. The Harris machine's file system was like a tape, like a magnetic tape, and so you could store part of your files here. Then you'd have an inner gap, with like tape pad. Then you could store another set of files, and it was attached to the terminal. If your terminal croaked, your file was locked, and you couldn't go to another terminal and unlock it. You had to go to the administrator, and the administrator had to take down the port and then reinitialize the port. And so I was doing that all the time. And I'd have to come in early in the morning, about 6 o'clock or 5:30, and take all these. They had a bulkhead with all these RS-232 cables, supposedly RS-232 cables. And I'd have to go initialize all those and set them all up. Well, after they'd gotten disillusioned with me because I didn't want to give up my professorship to be a technician for upstairs, that's what they expected of me, because they didn't understand what a plus job professors have, compared to this being a little low-brow technician, no prestige at all. So the guy from the service department down here comes in and he says, I guess I'm going to have to pull all the wires out from under the upstairs that go from the computer over to the terminals because nothing works and I can't figure out anything. And I said, well, I know what's the matter. So I went and fixed it for him, which was a no-no because I wasn't supposed to ever touch the machine again as punishment. Well, he went and told the boss about that, and the boss come out just storming down the hallway. Capener's not supposed to touch anything. And one of the other guys comes up to me and he says, Capener, how can you take this? And I said, because I'm not going to be here next month. I'm leaving. But that was a nerve-wracking job. I could never convince people that they had the wrong cables. They weren't really RS-232 cables. And the people down in the service thing who didn't know anything about computers, they wouldn't listen to me. People upstairs wouldn't listen to me. And so finally the Harris people brought in a guy from California and a guy from Seattle, and they all sat down and did this brainstorm and come up with the conclusion, we got the wrong cables, which made me happy. Because I could sit back and say, I told you so.
But you didn't get your access back from that.
I did.
No. So they wanted you out of there just because you wouldn't stay?
Because I wouldn't give up my professorship and become their technician. See, I'm a controversial person. I was doing things out here, out here in the forefront of things, a lot of things. You know, I'm the one that suggested that we set up an inventors institute here, and that we use the facilities and the faculty we'd screen people who wanted to invent things, like MS-DOS, and come in and we'd set this up. And what we would do is we would take a % of the royalties they got from the invention and to fund us on that. We put that down. I did suggest that we do a huge program with the National Science Foundation and bring in all the schools to do this thing with education to make it more hands-on. And they did take that idea and run with it. And they did get that one. And what was nice is the guy from the Fermi Labs, who was on the National Science Foundation Committee, praised me for having such a good idea. He's the only one I ever recognized that was my idea, though. and during that time, when we'd all meet from the University of Utah, BYU, and Utah State, and Weber, and so on, I had another great idea. And nobody wanted to listen to me here. So I told the University of Utah physics guys. And they did it, got big bucks, and was quite successful. And it used that little computer that we put together.
They used it?
Yeah. That's the type of computer they used. So just through working with students, close to students, and watching them, and seeing what really benefited them, I got this idea that the hands-on stuff, the really doing things, and getting students at the undergraduate level involved in research was really beneficial to them. That it helped them in a job market, you know, and it gave them a sense of being too, you know, like we were part. So that's one reason I had all the lab rats running in here. These guys, it's unbelievable what they did off that Deck 10. They had a Star Wars game. They'd taken the Fortran code, they'd gotten this rudimentary game off the network someplace, and they expanded that thing so all the terminals are interacting with each other and doing that. And they did the Fresnel pictures, you know. They did all sorts of things. What would you run up? $35,000 bill upstairs because we'd made a picture. And I said, well, it's just funny money. You guys are good at manipulating books. Don't worry about it. Yeah, but your department used $35,000 of this funny money for one picture. Don't worry about it. You guys owe me about $1 million for taking care of that Deck 10 later on, or the Harris machine. That was the biggest mistake. In fact, the last committee meeting we had, we got up and walked out and protested. Assistant Vice President says, Capener, we can never make you happy, can we? And I said, you're damn right you can't, because I know what I'm doing and you guys don't. You just threw away all sorts of money. You know, this thing's never going to work. The major program they had here was with the data processing department that did COBOL, and the salesman admitted they had the worst COBOL in the world. And, hell, I'd have to take care of students that come in. They'd find an error. There'd be an error in line 10 in their code, and it reported as in line 100 or something. And the poor students, they were just frustrated.
So you had to live with it in real time, isn't it?
Yeah, we
real
had
time, because you were using that machine
we
to
were
teach your
using
class
it all the time. We had to use it. Yeah, it was not, and they wanted us to write up a little thing to help the students. Well, I wrote up something that big. literally that big. I collected all the information, everything, to make it a reference manual for students that we put in the lab, and they could go make references to not do anything. And all I got was, "You stupid idiot," you know. So I have not been treated very well there. You can edit that out.
Okay.
Except our latest dean, he really did treat me well.
Our latest dean did?
Yeah, the dean that we have now.
Okay.
He's really been good to me. Oh, I got to tell you another story about this place, because he reminded me. He was standing in there. I came to the hallway right here, and there was a fellow that walked in from outside, and I came right behind him. He walked into through the door, stood right there, and he turned around to me and he says, "Do you work here?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And he says, "You should be kicked off the campus." And immediately I recognized that something was loose there, and there was a student sitting at the table there. And I carried on this conversation with this guy for about 20 minutes. And she slumped under the table, slid practically under the table. The fellow that just went up the stairs was standing over there waiting. My son, who was a Marine, he had this Marine short haircut and looked like a Marine. I mean, he looked like a Marine. And he says, "Where's the security officer?" And I said, "Right there." And my son was on the phone right there. And he looked at him, and he gave that idea up immediately. And finally he says, he would say, "Well, how did you get rid of it?" He says, "Who's in charge?" He kept saying, "Who's in charge? Who's in charge?" And I finally said, "Oh, Paul Thompson's in charge. He's the president of the school. And you go out this door and you go down that way to the administration building." He turned around and he walked out the door and down the administration building. And the lady got up and she says, "How did you know how to do that?" And I said, "Well, it finally dawned on me who was in charge here." So I just told him. By that time we went out and looked, and by that time he'd wandered off and forgotten about what was going on.
Weird.
So as a professor, you get all sorts of strange things that happen. You never know.
Okay. So we're recording.
Are we ready? Okay.
Yep.
Let me say some more things about the next. The terminal wasn't a normal terminal. It was the actual display on the terminal was PostScript, and the printer was PostScript, which was really new. It was one of the new technologies. And the reason he did it that way is because with PostScript you can expand characters, and it keeps the orientation and the sizing right, you know. And so it was great for doing things like Japanese languages and Chinese languages and things like that. And anyway, so let's talk about these. This is an acoustic modem. This is what we used to have to use. What you do is hook it up to your telephone system, and then you'd take the telephone and you'd put it in these little cups right here. That's the way you would communicate. So the first, when I had my NSF grant, I used to communicate with the University of Utah's Unisys system over these acoustic phone lines like that. And we were going at an absolute super speed, 30 characters a second. 30 baud. We were really fast because we'd been on 10 and we'd gone up to 30. Then when we got our little microvac systems, we also got a tape drive with it. And that's what these tape systems that you see here. You know, we could mount these tape systems, and then we'd store all our data and programs and everything on these tapes. So we had lots of these tapes. And the year that Star Wars was introduced, the first Star Wars, I'd written to AT&T and gotten the Unix source code, the source code for the Unix operating system, and the school had gotten a hold of a PDP-11. They'd given it to the electronics department instead of the computer department. Computer departments didn't need computers, but electronics did. I've never figured that one out. So actually, we did a lot of work with them, and we ended up getting a grant or a contract with Hill Field, where we worked with presenting graphical user interfaces for the F-16 aircraft when they first came out there and all that. And I remember writing a program and using the Deck 10 at that time and the PDP-11 to track all the F-16s, where all the F-16s were. And we had some super ideas we gave, hooking up computers to the planes and finding them. Now I see they do that now, years after. So we did a lot of work with the tapes and the modems and that. These big discs like this, they used to be. You'd see these big IBM disk drives, huge things. And they cost a fortune. And one year I took that Tim Mannis to the Stanford Artificial Intelligence Lab, and I happened to have a relation that worked in the computer building there, and so he got us in there, and they had a room probably as large as the computer science building, the main floor of the computer science, and it was filled with those $250,000 tape drives. Just literally filled half the room with that and half the room with these huge disk drives, which didn't have much storage. You were talking about in the K range, instead of the gigabyte or terabyte, you're talking about the K range. And they had 4 giant IBM machines with like a gigabyte of memory. Now, when we got the Deck 10, I think it was like 80K of memory was $80,000. I mean, it was super expensive. Memory was super expensive. So in 1994, where these little tapes came from, was like I got a chance to write a grant for the Unix program, and I was headed to Silicon Valley to take a class on Unix internals. 2 days before I left, the week before I left, I'd gotten in touch with the people down in Salt Lake that worked for AT&T and told them I was interested in this grant. And they came up, and I explained to them how we had the source code and we'd had it for a long time. We had these classes on Unix and everything. And I said, we didn't know Weaver State was doing stuff like this. We were really impressed. So I went off to my class, and the day that I was leaving, the guy calls me up and he says, you're eligible to write a proposal. So I had 2 weeks to write this proposal, and I was going to be gone for a week. So I kind of roughed it out while I was at the class, came back, hurriedly got all this crap through, got so discouraged I threw it finally with the bureaucracy. I threw it in a garbage can, and my daughter and my son, who were majoring in computer science, says, no, Dad, you got to take it in. So I called the guy up in Salt Lake, and he said, I got bad news. It has to be in Seattle by tomorrow morning. So I had to run out to the FedEx guys 15 minutes before they closed and get it FedEx. Well, most people think that was a gift. It wasn't. They had divided the country up into 3 divisions. And out of each division, they were going to take one person, one group out of each division. So there'd be three that got things, one in each division. So I had to compete against all the rest of the schools that had applied for that thing. And they came out in the summer. They sent a group of people out in the summer. And we sat down in a conference room, and I explained to them how all this stuff was going to work and everything. And they were so impressed, they gave it to us. And so we ended up with approximately $1.2 million in hardware and software. And we had requested that we have a tape drive in each machine. These are all PC-type machines. And what they did was they put a tape drive in at the place they put the machine together, and then they shipped a separate tape drive, thinking, the other group hadn't put it in. So we actually had 2 of them. And the guy was installing. He says, "Well, I could send all these back." And we said, "No. We'll take 2 of them. And then we can do tape to tape type, have tape to tape type experience with them." And that's where all these little kind of tapes like this came from. And and also the Sun machine had those kind of drives. So we filled up from the south lab, clear to the north lab. We filled that up with machines. And the X window terminals had just started coming on, and the AT&T guy called me and says, "You can include X window terminals." So I filled the north room there full of X window terminals. And that was, I had another student that knew all about the web browsers. And we connected with one of my students who lived in Layton. We connected with his phone, and then from his phone to the Unisys guys, and then we got our feed through there to the internet. Doing that, maybe that was shady, I don't know. But we actually were probably one of the first places to use the internet, first institutions to use the internet, because we'd done that. And it was only about 1.5 years after it had been developed. And see, we have Next machine. It was developed on the Next machine. And this was so impressive. The use of X window terminals, the use of the GUI type interface in the browser. That we'd have students from down in the social science building come up when they discovered the lab. They'd come in and use this. And one of them even went to the assistant vice president and said, "All right, we got to do this all over the campus," So we did a lot of pioneering work that other people benefited but never knew really where it came from. And so the tapes, my students put most of the equipment together. They had one technician they'd sent us, and he didn't know how to do many things, like installing the software and all that. He was just putting up the hardware. So I just took all the students that I had, my lab rats, and we just went through and installed everything. What was nice about it is it made it possible for our department to do networking. For the first time, we could really have a networking class that meant something, because you could install the cards, and we installed all the cards, and then you could program all the cards, set up all the IP addresses, and we actually had a gateway that went from the Unix system to the DOS system that we had in the South Lab. So we had all sorts of, and they gave us bridges and I don't think we had to make our own routers, but we had all of those things like that.
You had to make your own routers?
On using the machine. We got the bridges and I'm trying to think what else they were there. Some other devices. Yeah. Oh, and we actually used the big cable at one time where you had to punch it in and hook it up.
Vampire taps, right?
Yeah, the vampire clamps. Yeah. And then, in fact, somebody upstairs just found one of our big wires with the vampire clamps. And we wired ourselves up to upstairs. So eventually we hooked in to the main machine. And we did a lot of networking for the campus even got around to it.
This is before we're down here in this building?
We were down here in this building then. So this was in 1994. We did it. But the campus hadn't been really wired up for networking at that time. It was moving along. But so that was a big boost to the department, because we could do we had the DEC 10. I mean, we had the VAX machine. By that time, they'd gotten the VAX machine.
Was the Harris machine gone by then?
The DEC 10 had gone, the DEC 20 had gone, and they had the Harris machine was gone, and they had a VAX machine upstairs. So we had a mainframe, and then we had all the microcomputers. and we had our Unix boxes. And we had probably the best Unix program for education in the whole United States, maybe the world, because one holiday, Martin Luther King's holiday, I was up here working, and because I work 20 hours a day all the time, this was my home, and I'm leaving it now, So this is, I haven't thought about the trauma yet. So this guy from Motorola down in Phoenix, Arizona, called up and he says, I've searched the web, I've searched all the universities, and you have the best Unix program that I can find. Do you have any students? Well, I think by that time, the Fed Gov says, well, you can't tell people that you have good students. It's against the law. Because we used to get calls all the time. I'd get calls from people that say, I need a student that has lathe experience, machining experience, that has, computer experience, and knows Unix. And I'd say, yeah, we got them. Because between, our whole school, we had that good program, and then most of the kids around here had to grow up doing something else because we didn't have real high tech in Ogden then. So I placed students all the time. And then the government come along and says, you can't tell anybody you got a good student. It's against the law. So what you do now is you have to tell them to call up the people over in the administration building and have them tell them what you want, and then they'll write up a thing, and then they'll send it out here in a week, and we'll post it on the wall, and the student can read it, and then the student can apply, and and the job's gone. That's the way it works. Instead of immediately, saying, yeah, contact this kid right here. He's the best in my class, or he's got the specific things that you need.